The first snowball was almost playful. The second one carried hatred in its frozen heart. It wasn't just the impact that stunned Emma as she knelt on the weathered steps of her modest townhouse, but the deliberate cruelty compressed into that icy projectile. It struck her cheekbone with a vicious crack, ice shards embedded at its core designed to inflict maximum pain. Her vision swam, the gray winter sky spinning above bare oak branches. Her son, Noah, pressed himself tighter against her side, a small, trembling figure wrapped in a red puffer jacket, his blue sneakers scraping against the snow-dusted concrete. Before Emma could even register the stinging pain radiating across her face, another assault began. This time, it wasn't snowballs, but deliberate kicks from heavy boots, sending waves of powder and ice crystals into their faces. The frozen spray stung their eyes and filled their mouths with the bitter taste of winter grime and motor oil. This wasn't some accidental confrontation or teenage mischief gone wrong. This was calculated. This was targeted. This was malicious. And if you've ever experienced that sinking feeling of complete helplessness, of being utterly vulnerable while someone deliberately tries to hurt you, then you'll understand why Emma's story needs to be told. There were 5 of them, really just teenagers pretending to be men. They swaggered in their crimson and black varsity jackets, a fierce eagle emblazoned over their hearts with the words Westfield Warriors stitched beneath it. They were the hallway royalty, the basketball court legends, the Friday night heroes whose entire identities had become so intertwined with those jackets that they genuinely believed themselves invincible, even beyond the school grounds. Their names were Brandon, the instigator with eyes that gleamed with casual cruelty; Devin, his towering enforcer who used his size like a weapon; the cousins, Tyler and Jordan, whose constant mocking laughter provided the soundtrack to every act of bullying they committed; and finally Austin, the newest member, still trying to prove he belonged by being the most vicious of them all. They climbed into Devin's oversized SUV that afternoon, restless and hunting for entertainment. Their search had brought them here, to this quiet cul-de-sac, to this small brick townhouse with its slightly overgrown garden and peeling window frames. They'd spotted weakness, vulnerability, a perfect outlet for their misplaced aggression and toxic sense of superiority. But Emma Rodriguez was far more than what they saw. She was a widow drowning in grief. The black cardigan she wore over her pale gray dress wasn't a fashion choice. It was mourning clothes, a tribute to the man she had laid to rest just 5 days earlier, Michael. His name was a constant whisper in every room of the home they'd built together. He'd been a firefighter, a man whose courage had defined his entire life, from the daughter he'd saved from a house fire to the very townhouse steps where Emma now knelt. An unexpected heart attack at 42 had stolen him away, a thief that came in the night and shattered their world, leaving Emma and Noah adrift in an ocean of incomprehensible loss. The somber clothes were Emma's way of honoring him publicly, a promise she'd made to wear muted colors for 2 weeks, to acknowledge the profound void his absence had carved into their lives. To the boys in the Warriors' jackets, it was just drab, forgettable clothing on a forgettable woman. They had no comprehension that it represented a love so deep that its absence had fundamentally broken something inside her. "Check out the zombie lady," Brandon sneered, his breath creating white clouds in the freezing air. "You having a funeral or what?" He kicked another arc of heavy, wet snow directly at Emma's lap. The icy wetness soaked through her dress immediately, the cold shocking against her skin. She flinched involuntarily, her arms instinctively tightening around Noah. "Please," Emma's voice emerged as barely more than a whisper, rough from days of crying in the bitter cold. "Please just leave us alone. We haven't done anything to you." "You're existing on our street," Devin rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. He was massive, a wall of muscle and aggression barely contained. "This is Westfield territory. You and your little kid don't fit here. This dump should have been bulldozed years ago." It was completely false, of course. Emma's parents had purchased this townhouse decades ago, long before any of these boys were even born. But to them, anyone outside their narrow circle of privilege and arrogance was an intruder, a blemish to be erased. Tyler and Jordan chimed in with their signature mocking harmony.
"Yeah, why don't you pack up your sad little life and get lost? Nobody wants you here anyway."
Emma's mind raced desperately, a trapped animal searching frantically for any escape route. Her phone sat inside on the kitchen counter. The neighbors were mostly elderly retirees, their houses set back from the street behind tall fences. Nobody would hear her if she screamed for help. Her car was completely blocked by Devon's massive SUV parked diagonally across her driveway. They were isolated, completely and utterly alone. She looked down at Noah, whose small 7-year-old body shook with silent, terrified sobs. The sight of her son's fear cut through her own panic like a blade, replacing it with something fiercer, something primal and protective. "Take my purse," she said, her voice gaining a threat of desperate strength. "It's just inside the door. Take whatever you want and please just go."
Brandon laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed off the brick facades. "We don't want your pathetic money, lady. We want you to understand something." He took a deliberate step closer, his expensive basketball shoe crunching on the frozen ground. "You're a stain on our neighborhood. We're here to clean it up." He reached down, not toward Emma, but toward Noah, his fingers grasping for the hood of the boy's red jacket. That was the line, the absolute uncrossable boundary. A sound tore from Emma's throat, raw and primal, a guttural cry of pure maternal defiance and rage. "Get your hands away from my son!" She surged upward, throwing her body between Brandon and Noah like a human shield. For just a moment, the boys actually seemed startled by her sudden ferocity, by this unexpected resistance. Then Devon's face hardened into something cruel and cold. He stepped forward with purpose and shoved her, hard, using his considerable strength. Emma stumbled backward, her legs giving out beneath her, and she crashed against the townhouse door with a sickening thud before collapsing back onto the concrete steps, dazed and disoriented. Noah's scream, high-pitched and piercing, cut through the frigid afternoon air like a siren. The boys loomed over the fallen woman and terrified child, their laughter returning, louder now, emboldened by their act of violence. They began kicking more snow, not the light powdery stuff, but the heavy, filthy slush from the gutter, pelting mother and son without mercy, reveling in their dominance and cruelty. This was their moment of triumph, when they felt most powerful, most invincible. They were so completely consumed by their petty tyranny, so lost in their pathetic display of dominance, that they failed to notice the world around them shifting in a fundamental way. They didn't see the blinds snap shut in the house directly next door, a house that had appeared quiet and empty all afternoon. They didn't notice the shadow moving with purpose behind those windows. The house next door belonged to Lieutenant James Crawford, and James Crawford was Force Recon Marine. He wasn't just a veteran collecting a pension and telling old war stories. He was active duty, home for a desperately needed 96-hour leave between back-to-back deployments. He'd been trying to sleep off the bone-deep exhaustion from his last operation, a classified mission in a hostile desert region that had tested every limit of his physical and mental endurance. The sounds of raised voices had initially been just background noise, an annoyance he tried to filter out and ignore. But then came the scream, a child's scream filled with pure terror. It was a sound that bypassed all his training, all his carefully constructed walls, all his fatigue, and went straight to his core. It was a sound he'd heard in war zones across 3 continents, a sound that always signaled the worst of humanity unleashing itself on the innocent and helpless. He was at the window in 3 long strides, his body moving on pure instinct before his conscious mind had even fully processed what he was doing. The scene unfolding on his neighbor's front steps was something pulled straight from his worst nightmares. 5 large males, clearly teenagers, but nearly full-grown. A woman in mourning clothes, crumpled and defenseless on concrete steps. A small child, absolutely terrified, and the body language, the aggressive postures, the casual brutality of the kicked snow and mocking laughter, it painted an unmistakable picture of a vicious, cowardly assault in progress. A familiar coldness settled over James, a terrifying calm that his team members had learned to recognize and respect. This wasn't his quiet suburban neighborhood anymore. This was a tactical situation. An unacceptable threat had presented itself to civilians who couldn't defend themselves. The response needed to be immediate, overwhelming, and absolutely decisive. He didn't waste time running to his gun safe or dialing 911. The threat assessment was instantaneous and clear. The danger was imminent and escalating. The required response needed to happen now,
not in 5 minutes when police might arrive. He moved quickly to his back door where a powerful shape rose smoothly from a cushioned bed in the utility room. Titan, his military working dog partner, a 95-pound Belgian Malinois with intelligent dark eyes and loyalty that was absolute and unwavering. Titan wasn't a pet or a companion animal. He was a highly trained weapon, a sophisticated sensor system, a brother in arms. He read the subtle change in James's posture instantly, the tension radiating from his handler, and was on his feet in a heartbeat, a low, questioning whine building in his throat. "Heel," James commanded, his voice low, flat, and utterly calm. The word wasn't a request or suggestion. It was a trigger that activated years of intensive training. Titan fell immediately into position at James's left side, his muscular body taut and ready, his focus sharpening to a razor's edge. Together, man and dog moved through the house with practiced efficiency and out the side door into the biting cold. They didn't use the front gate or driveway. They moved with a predator's absolute silence along the property line, using the snow-laden bushes and fence line for concealment and tactical advantage. The bullies remained so focused on their victims, so completely lost in their pathetic display of dominance, that they had absolutely no awareness that a highly trained predator was stalking them from just yards away. James took in the entire scene with a sniper's trained eye for detail. The woman, Emma, he vaguely remembered her name from a brief neighborly wave several months ago, was desperately trying to shield her son with her own body, absorbing the worst of the assault. The ringleader, the one with the cruel smirk and expensive jacket, was reaching toward the child again with obvious malicious intent. The time for observation and assessment was over. The time for action had arrived. "Hey." But the word wasn't shouted or yelled. It was delivered with quiet, conversational force that somehow cut through all the laughter and the child's cries like a blade through silk. It was so utterly unexpected, so calm, and yet somehow so absolutely dangerous that all 5 boys froze mid-action, their heads snapping toward the source of the sound like puppets on strings. James Crawford stepped out from behind the fence line and into plain view. He wasn't wearing a winter coat or civilian clothes. He wore his desert Marpac camouflage pants and a tight-fitting tactical shirt despite the freezing temperature. The clothes did nothing to conceal the powerful, efficient muscle forged through endless hours of brutal training and real combat. His posture appeared relaxed, but it was the deceptive relaxation of a coiled spring ready to explode. His eyes, a cold steel blue, scanned across all 5 of them with clinical precision, assessing, categorizing, threat-ranking each target. Beside him, Titan stood like a statue carved from black marble in focused intent. The dog's lips were slightly curled, not quite a snarl, but definitely not friendly either, revealing just a glimpse of teeth that looked like polished ivory daggers. His eyes locked onto the group with laser focus, waiting for a single command from his handler. The bully's confidence, so solid and unshakable just moments before, shattered like thin ice under a boot. The entire dynamic of the situation had inverted in a single, silent heartbeat. They were no longer the predators. They had become the prey. Brandon, desperately trying to reclaim the dominance he'd felt so certain of, puffed out his chest and tried to sound tough. "This is none of your business, old man. Walk away before you regret it." The bravado in his voice was transparently thin and brittle, the sound of someone trying to convince themselves they weren't terrified. James didn't even look directly at Brandon. His eyes remained fixed on Devin, the biggest one, having immediately identified him as the primary physical threat in the group. "You have exactly 5 seconds to leave this property," James said, his voice still maintaining that terrifyingly even tone. "The clock started when I stepped into view." Devin, emboldened by his considerable size and a lifetime of successfully using it to intimidate people, took what he clearly thought was a threatening step forward. "Or what? You and your dog going to do something about it?" That was the critical mistake, the point of no return. James didn't answer with words. He didn't need to. He simply gave a hand signal, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture with 2 fingers. Titan exploded into motion. It wasn't a run. It was a launch, like a missile leaving its platform, a blur of black fur and condensed lethal power crossing the 20-foot distance in less than 2 heartbeats. He didn't bark or growl in warning. The only sounds were the rapid drumming of his paws on frozen earth and the terrifying guttural roar that erupted from his chest as he became airborne in his final leap. He didn't aim for Devin's throat, which would have been immediately lethal. He aimed for the arm that was rising in a defensive gesture.
Titan's jaws closed around Devon's thick jacket sleeve with a sound like a steel trap slamming shut. The sheer force of the impact was immense, spinning the large teenager completely around and sending him crashing to the frozen ground, screaming in shock, pain, and absolute terror. Titan held fast, his body a tense, immovable force, his eyes glaring up at the terrified boy beneath him, a low, continuous growl rumbling like an engine idling, ready to accelerate at any moment. It was a perfectly controlled takedown, a message written in pain and absolute submission that spoke louder than any words ever could. The reaction from the other four was instantaneous and pathetic. Tyler and Jordan stood completely frozen, their faces transformed into masks of pure, undiluted terror, wet stains spreading down their expensive jeans as their bladders released involuntarily. Austin had gone absolutely pale, swaying on his feet like he might faint. Brandon, the ringleader, took several stumbling steps backward, his earlier bravado completely evaporated, replaced by the wide-eyed fear of a small child confronted by a monster from their nightmares.
James walked forward with economical, precise movements. He stopped directly in front of Brandon, looking down at the terrified teenager. "I believe I gave you a clear order," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, which was somehow infinitely more frightening than any shout could have been. "You now have exactly two options. You can help your friend to that vehicle and leave immediately, or I can give my partner another command. He hasn't eaten yet today and he's quite hungry. Your choice. Choose now." Brandon couldn't even form words. He just nodded frantically, a jerky, desperate motion like a bobblehead doll. He and the terrified cousins scrambled to where Devon was still pinned and whimpering on the ground beneath Titan's unwavering grip. "Release," James commanded in that same flat tone. Titan immediately let go of Devon's sleeve and stepped back, but maintained his low, ready posture, his gaze fixed unwaveringly on the fallen boy, a crystal-clear promise of what would happen if anyone made the wrong move. The four boys dragged a sobbing, near-hysterical Devon to his feet and half-carried, half-dragged him toward the SUV. They fumbled desperately with the doors, stumbling over each other in their panic to escape. The engine roared to life, and the vehicle peeled away with tires spinning wildly on the slick pavement, disappearing down the residential street in a cloud of exhaust and scattered slush. The sudden silence that fell over the yard felt profound and almost sacred. The only sounds were the gentle whisper of wind through the bare tree branches and Noah's quiet, hiccuping sobs as he clung to his mother. James turned his back on the retreating threat, his entire focus immediately shifting to the two victims still huddled on the concrete steps. The warrior's mask fell away completely, replaced by an expression of deep, genuine concern. "Ma'am," he said, his voice now soft and gentle, completely transformed. "My name is James. I live right next door. Are you injured? Is your son hurt?" She couldn't form coherent words. Emma looked up at him through eyes swimming with shock, residual terror, and overwhelming relief all tangled together. She just shook her head and pulled Noah even tighter against her. Titan, his tactical mission completed, trotted over to them with his tail in a neutral position. He didn't approach aggressively or with any threat. He lowered his head and gave a soft, questioning whine, gently nuzzling Emma's trembling hand with his cold, wet nose. It was an incredible transformation to witness, the living weapon becoming a source of comfort and reassurance. James knelt several feet away, deliberately giving them space and not crowding them. "It's over now," he said firmly, his voice leaving absolutely no room for doubt. "They won't come back. I give you my word on that." He looked at Noah, who was peeking out from behind his mother's protective arms, his tear-streaked face fixed on the big tan and black dog. James offered a small, reassuring smile. "Hey, buddy. His name is Titan. He's one of the good guys. He really likes kids." Tentatively, moving with the cautious slowness of a frightened animal, Noah reached out one small gloved hand. Titan, sensing the child's lingering fear with the emotional intelligence these dogs were specially selected for, leaned forward carefully and gave the glove a gentle lick. A tiny, hiccuping giggle escaped Noah's lips, the first sound of joy Emma had heard from her son in over a week. It was the most beautiful sound in the entire world. The police arrived approximately 15 minutes later, called by one of the elderly neighbors who had finally witnessed the commotion and its dramatic conclusion. James provided his statement with calm, precise military efficiency.
describing the assault he'd witnessed and providing the exact make, model, and license plate number of the vehicle. The responding officers, recognizing the description of the Westfield Warriors' jackets, knew exactly who they were dealing with. These boys had a reputation. They took Emma's statement, their expressions growing increasingly grim as she recounted the events leading up to the attack, her voice trembling as she explained why she was wearing mourning clothes, why they'd targeted her when she was at her most vulnerable. The fallout was swift and comprehensive. The boys, thoroughly shaken to their cores and facing serious criminal charges including assault, battery, harassment, and threatening a minor, confessed immediately when confronted. Their parents, several of whom held prominent positions in the community, were absolutely horrified. The eagle and warriors text on their precious varsity jackets, once symbols of pride and achievement, became marks of shame and disgrace. They were permanently expelled from Westfield High. Their college athletic scholarships were immediately revoked. Their futures were fundamentally and irrevocably altered by a single afternoon of cruel choices. But this story isn't really about their punishment or consequences. It's about what was preserved and protected. In the days and weeks that followed that frozen afternoon, James checked on Emma and Noah daily. He fixed the loose railing on their front steps without being asked. He shoveled their walkway every morning before they woke up. He was a quiet, steady, reliable presence in the swirling chaos of their grief and trauma. He and Emma would talk slowly at first, carefully, then more deeply as trust built. She learned about Michael, about his courage and dedication. James shared carefully selected stories about the brotherhood he'd found and lost in the Marines, about the bonds that formed in impossible circumstances. A fragile but genuine healing bond began to form between the three of them, built on a foundation of mutual respect and a traumatic event that had paradoxically brought unexpected light into overwhelming darkness. Several weeks later, the first real thaw arrived. Patches of brown grass emerged stubbornly from the retreating snow. Emma was in the kitchen preparing hot chocolate when she heard the unmistakable sound of genuine laughter floating in from the backyard. She moved to the window and looked out. Noah, wearing his red puffer jacket and blue sneakers, was running through the slushy grass with his arms spread wide like airplane wings, pure joy radiating from every movement. Chasing him with a playful, loping gait was Titan, his tongue hanging out, clearly enjoying the game, and watching them both, leaning casually against the fence with a small, quiet smile on his weathered face, was James. The sight struck Emma with the force of a physical blow to her chest. It wasn't the dramatic rescue, the terrifying efficiency of the takedown that finally broke through her emotional walls. It was this simple, quiet moment of pure normalcy, of joy, of safety and protection. It was the sight of her son laughing, truly, genuinely laughing for the first time since his father had died, since their entire world had collapsed. The dam of her carefully controlled grief finally burst. But the tears that streamed down her face weren't purely tears of sorrow anymore. They were tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude mixed with hope for the future. The long, dark winter wasn't completely over yet, but the first fragile green shoots of renewal and new beginnings were definitely pushing their way up through the frozen earth toward the light. The widow in mourning clothes had begun to find color in her world again. The little boy in the red jacket had rediscovered his smile and his childhood, all because a warrior and his loyal canine partner happened to live next door, providing a silent, watchful promise that even in the absolute darkest of times, there are still those who will stand firmly against the storm and protect the innocent. This story from a quiet suburban cul-de-sac, a moment of profound cruelty meeting an even more profound act of protection and courage, resonates with something fundamental about the human spirit. It reminds us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear combat boots and tactical pants. Sometimes they have 4 legs and a fierce loyalty that knows no bounds. From which corner of this vast country are you watching this video today? Let me know in the comments below. I make it a point to read every single one.